The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to APPA's monthly webinar series. My name is Billy Zadig, Standards and Codes Administrator for APPA. Just a couple of housekeeping items before we get started. This webinar is being recorded. The recording will be posted on our webinar page later this afternoon. You will receive a follow-up email tomorrow with a link to the webpage where all webinar recordings are housed, as well as a link to our upcoming webinars. We have webinars planned through December, and many are open for registration. All attendees are in listen-only mode. Please type your questions in the chat box, and they will be answered in the order they are received during the Q&A session at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time and we still have questions, responses will be sent directly to the person asking the question by the presenters. Continuing education credits are being offered for this webinar. If you did not request a certificate when you registered, please contact me at Billie, B-I-L-L-I-E, at appa.org for more information. Also, if you have more than one person attending this session from a central location, please contact me so everyone gets credit for attending. At this time, it's my pleasure to turn this over to Anna and Deke.
Yes, my name is Deke Smith, and I retired pretty much, so I'm a partner with my own company right now, but I am co-chair of the APPA 1000 standard. So we worked part 1 and also now working on part 2.
Hello, and I'm Anna Teemer. I also am a co-chair, and I work at the University of Texas at Austin.
We have 4 learning objectives today, and what we're looking at is trying to give you information to be able to get you motivated to be able to move right into implementing as soon as the standard comes out, or even work before that. But we want to identify what the value of TCO and the benefits of that, learning the principles and how the principles apply now to implementation.
We're also looking at what a minimum TCO implementation entails, and then what you can do today to get started with that, whether you just have one asset or multiple assets. If we take a look at our agenda, we're going to do that by giving you a brief introduction to the APPA ANSI TCO standard. We're also going to take a look at our relationships and benefits.
And then what you can do and getting your mindset ready, your strategy set for being able to move into TCO. What are those next steps that you can take, and what we're going to be able to provide for you?
So to get started, if we take a look at where our profession has gone from just a facilities operations maintenance back in the very beginning, now to looking a little bit further, adding in utility distribution construction coordination up until the 80s, adding in program coordination, space management, planning and design, and then now today we've had additional duties where we're looking at strategic planning funding options. We have so many things we're trying to juggle. Total cost of ownership becomes a key element in answering those tough questions. Our TCO definition that's published, very long, but we break it up into 2 sections, the first being the summation of all known and estimated costs, and the second being to aid in the life cycle asset management decision, so 2 parts to the definition. We're going to focus on the first part, the summation of all known and estimated costs.
And this is what really sets TCO apart from from things like life cycle cost. It's not only the fact that we're looking at initial costs, which we always will look at, but we're also looking at operations and maintenance, utilities, what is the cost of renewal to keeping the asset alive, and then once it does get to the end of useful life, being able to figure out when that point is and be able to take all that information, sum it together, but also look at what is the impact on your organization of these different assets. So what we want to look at is, and I think this is really the challenge that the industry has, and each organization has, it's probably the hardest, is moving into a life cycle strategy. It doesn't mean that you have to change your organization around as much as just getting into an environment where you're sharing information across the life cycle. So historically, and everybody's pretty much aware of this, at projects, you collect information during planning and you pass it on to design. You collect it during design, you pass it on to construction, pass it on to operation. But at each stage, we lose incredible amounts of information because we're just passing on a set of drawings and a specification and things like that. And in a lot of cases, from construction to operations, you have to go out and regather all the information. This is information that somebody already gathered through the whole process. In fact, I would even venture to say at this point that nearly every piece of information today has been available electronically at some point in time. The challenge we have is being able to capture that information, hold on to that information, and repurpose it. So collect data one time, use it many times. And if you do that, you come up with what's called an information thread, where you continually add on to this information. And it's a much more forward-thinking approach. And what happens is all the information under the curve then becomes your return on investment, the value of really doing TCO.
And to continue that benefit of total cost of ownership, you really get reliable decision making. Total cost of ownership, when you sum the total cost of everything together, it could be the least option that is the best, but ultimately it should be the best for the organization, which may not be equal to the least of the organization. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Total cost of ownership is also a planning tool, and it also provides you with a sense of financial acumen for budgeting within your organization. If we look at our total cost of ownership principles that were outlined in part 1, we've got 4 groupings of that. We won't go into detail of those, but they build upon each other. So integrity is the first one you start with, then foundation, information gathering, and that leads to decision making.
So what we've done also is we've taken a look at a lot of other standards that are out there, not just TCO alone, and we didn't start from scratch necessarily. What we did was took a look at what's really out there, and we've also taken all those standards, and there's a chart in part 2 that you can read more easily. But in concept here, we've looked at each one of the principles and how those different standards apply to each of those. And so ultimately what we are trying to do is come up with the APPA TCO standard, which will be, as part 1 has already become ANSI approved, we're working towards approval for part 2, and that ultimately will be the US implementation of total cost of ownership. However, it's based on a worldwide effort. So, and many of you may already be implementing ISO 55000, which is asset management, and maybe some of you are actually looking at 41000 facility management. There's also ISO 15686, which is service life. Those 3 are kind of the foundation, if you will, and they're all based on international standards. And those are also, each of those are based on international standards. So you get into GIS, you get into unique identifiers, you get into looking at performance. You also get into a RICS document that we found was very interesting, and RICS is the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors. They have a document called the International Construction Management Standards 2, version 2, which is now looking at life cycle. The version 1 only looked at first cost. Now they're looking also at life cycle costs. So we found a lot of information in there. Looking at how do you do audits, looking at part 4 actually of 15686 ties into building information modeling. So all these things really tie in and relate to each other. Once you get into that world, now you're getting into things like industry foundation class, and getting into COBE, construction operations, building information exchange. You're getting into using OmniClass, which is really the follow-on to master format and uniformat, things like that. And those are all international standards. They tie to, there's a new standard for BIM out, which was based on a British standard, and also you get into the building smart data dictionary, those kind of things. And why this is important is because all of these things are collecting information. They are all information, it's all information that can be fed to total cost of ownership. So you don't have to, you may only be having to collect maybe 10% of the information you need to be able to do total cost of ownership. Historically, you had to collect all that information. And that's the mindset we've got to change, is that you say, I'm not really having to go out and collect all this information to be able to do TCO. I only have to be able to tap into the resources that are being gathered from other parts of the organization and only add on the information that's specifically related to cost.
So with all these benefits and relationships, why might we be slow to adopt a TCO implementation? With total cost of ownership, there are costs that are readily available or very, very visible to an organization. First costs, what hardware, what software, and then replacement and renewal. Those are relatively easy costs to find, whereas these other costs, much less easy to either share across the organization or even just track at all. Some organizations may not be tracking them at all. Other prohibitors to doing total cost of ownership, we might not be validating the data. It might not be reliable. There's projections or assume that maintenance programs are adequately funded, and we know that we typically aren't. There's also poor information handoff to maintenance that might be non-existent or might be sporadic. We might not be collecting the right level of data or the right data to make those decisions. And with any total cost of ownership or implementation, there's endless potential variables impacting costs. And so what we're going to do a deeper dive now, and then the last one is the need to purchase a BIM or a costly software purchase. That is a big prohibitor. All of these really become a prohibitor for implementing total cost of ownership. And what we're going to do now is a deeper dive into these principles and how you can squash some of these prohibitors and implement TCO.
So what we've, in part one, we really had started identifying there were 5 areas. We've really, as we got into looking at the implementation, 2 of those could be combined into, and we really look at 3 decision areas. And so instead of looking at products and new assets separately, we just combine those. So we have new assets and products. We're looking at existing assets. And this is really important. And I think a lot of things that you start with, and BIM's maybe an example even, you're looking at just new things. We really want to be able, you can create TCOs for your existing assets. In fact, you probably are pretty smart about those. You know how long things are lasting, and then you can project all that information onto your new assets. All this allows you to have a much better financial acumen of what's going on in your organization. So as an example, and we'll use it again. We used it before, and I think it's a really simple example that everybody can understand, and probably a decision that people have already made. And in that regard, you're already really doing TCO. What we want to do is just highlight those things and kind of recreate that environment on all the things you're looking at. We know that an incandescent bulb is really cheap to buy, but you have to buy them, a lot of them, and you have to replace them all the time. Whereas you go to the other end of the spectrum, after we did CFL for a while, and then now LED is just far and away above either incandescent or CFL. So most organizations have probably now switched to implementing and installing LEDs because they're but in this case, you know, they're far more expensive, although the prices are certainly coming down, but they're more expensive to buy at first, but they last and they don't use much energy. So it's an easy decision to make. So what you really had to do was look at, you know, what the system was, what the costs are, the age of it, and what your life cycle is. Those four basic data elements, okay, is what you need to be able to do a basic implementation of TCO. And so you take that information and you put it across the board for all your items. And we find that, you know, to implement LED, the payback period is extremely fast, and then it costs like a third of what it would cost of you know, other examples. So there's a huge return on investment, and I say that's made it pretty easy to do that. What you'll find is that there won't be the same kind of return on investment on all objects, but you will find a return on investment, and you add up all the little pieces and you'll get to some pretty big numbers. You'll get some real huge benefits. So that's where it then pays back to be able to have better information collecting tools in your portfolio to be able to implement TCO. So going back to the concept of, you know, what these items are, if we want to do it for a lot of things, now we're talking about adding in an asset database if we're doing it for all across the board on our existing facilities and things like that.
So if we take a look at what it would take to get from basic to a mid and complex implementation, we're basically looking at multiple assets across the organization at some level. Mid might be building level and complex might be system level. And I'll highlight some of the principles and some areas. Deke and I will both do that from what would take you from a basic to a mid. The standard does go into more detail. We're just going to highlight a few here. So in terms of integrity, the culture of the organization would have to be that of sharing information across the organization. Asset reporting would need to align with metrics. So there'd be some investigation on what's important to leadership and the organization. And then we'd have to create data management and verification processes. Deke talked a little bit about the metadata that's required. Why are we collecting it? Who's providing it? And then doing those checks along the way to make sure and ensure that it's still valid and accurate. Looking at foundation, we're looking at managed assets. What assets are important? You might start with a mid-level where you're selecting the priority or the top critical buildings or assets. And then a complex level would go down to a product or a specific system component level. Asset inventory, taking it all the way to complex, might be an IWMS system. That might be a BIM implementation, GIS implementation would be something to look for a complex level with your global location hierarchy. And then adopting an asset classification system. Again, Deke talked about our tied to other ISO standards, and adopting those within those standards is definitely something for TCO implementation that would take you from the basic to the mid and complex level.
So now if you have everybody gathering this information, you have the integrity and everything, you have this foundational information coming from a lot of places, now you can have a standard way of costing so that everybody's costing the same way, doing the costing the same way. You're going out and inspecting your various items throughout your campus. You're looking at what the performance of those are. You're comparing the performance of how they're working today to how they were operating originally. Maybe you do commissioning, maybe, you know, however it was designed, what it was designed to be able to do. With all that information, now you can go out and start making decisions. So what does that decision-making process look like? How do you set up and look at annual funding? Not necessarily just for next year. Okay, yeah, maybe you're only concentrating on next year's budget, but you can really now project out. We know how long it takes to replace, or how often you have to replace a roof, how often you have to replace a chiller or a hot water heater or whatever. And you can project that out into the future on all of your assets. So now you get a comprehensive plan of how all of your whole campus works and what bills are coming due in each year into the future. You can prepare for these spikes and things that are going to be coming down the road as time passes.
So we've identified some TCO strategies that you can implement today to take you from that basic to either mid or complex. And I think the most important one is a mindset of all costs versus just a first cost. What is the best value of what we were to spend today versus what we're spending over the life of the asset. Also looking at selecting the assets that are based on the alignment with the mission of the organization. Again, it's not, everything needs to tie back to leadership and the mission of your organization. Focusing on variables within your control. There's a lot of cost variables out there that the standard outlines for you to review and consider as you're adding these costs together. But those focus on those costing elements, not necessarily that are out of your control, but focusing those that are within your control. Actual costs are always better than estimated past costs, so if we can get those actual costs, that would be great. Alignment with your design and construction standards, whether that's a feedback loop or just developing design and construction standards that are written from a performance guideline perspective. Documenting our lessons learned after the purchase and the construction is also key when we look at our new assets and products and implementing TCO. And then whether you're giving a paper document, whether you're sending a PDF over email, or you're using COBE, it's best to enhance that handoff to maintenance and create those processes and procedures to ensure that maintenance has what they need once we select and purchase those new assets or products.
So in talking to, looking at any level, whether it's basic level or all the way up to a very complex level, what we are providing in part 2 is also a set of data elements. This is a data schema. What a data schema means is that it's all the possible data elements that you could collect and identify so that everybody, at least if everybody's collecting these data elements at a more detailed level, they're collecting them the same way. You need to, not combine them until you are ready to summarize them and things like that. So we have 3 areas. We have, well, actually, it's almost 4 areas. There's the data elements that are related to the formula that we talked about on an earlier slide. Then we have information that you have about that information that you're collecting. So, what's the name of the project and those kind of things, where is it located? Then you get into overall assumptions that you've made about the project. What is your escalation rate, or what is your what percentage? When is the building? What are the dates that you would be associated with the asset, or whether a facility or whether it's an individual item. And then I think personally one of the most important things that is very often left off is metadata. And metadata is data about the data. And basically what it says is that if you put a piece of information into a database, you need to know what is that piece of information? Was that information, that guess that Anna was just talking about, was it based on historical information? Was it a quote from somebody? And that, having that metadata and knowing what that number is, means that you don't necessarily have to go back and recollect that information when you're going to do another TCO analysis. It may be that you want to continually improve that number. So if it wasn't based on historical number in the past, and now you've got a quote for it, that's improved the information so people can understand it. So everybody just needs to know what data elements people are working with and who's providing that data. Who are the authoritative sources for this information? So that's why that whole section is provided. And I say it's a data scheme. It doesn't mean that you have to collect all these data elements, but if you are collecting those data elements, if you've made that decision that you have the resources to do that, then this is how you would do it.
So let's take a look at our existing assets and what's needed for a basic implementation and then a mid and a complex. So for basic, it's just the summation of our estimated past costs plus our estimated future costs. And these are for each of the 5 decision areas. A do nothing, which is just monitor the asset, repair it, retrofit or renew it, and then replace it. We use the same 5 data elements because you have multiple scenarios. You're going to need an asset database, system name, system cost, system age, and system life cycle. So 5 data elements there are needed. With existing assets, what you're doing is creating predictive scenarios out into the future, and the difference between each of these data elements is the costs. That's where the change occurs, and that's what you're analyzing with total cost of ownership. So let's take a look at an example. We have a roof example. So 5-year-old roof, 20-year-old life. The costs over 5 years, it was originally estimated at $500 a year, which totals $2,500. Our actual costs over 5 years is $2,000, or a total of $10K. Our original cost of the roof was $300K, and our current replacement value is $500K. So if we create scenarios for that, and the first one we'll look at is monitor. Originally cost $300K. We've sunk $10,000 over 5 years. If we continue that and just monitor the asset and replace it at with 500, we total those, we'll get a cost. But let's take a look at our renew. Our renew cost, we have our original cost at 300, our 10K, our 7,000, it would be reduced because we're assuming we go back to our 500 on average a year. And that 100,000 is the repair in year 6. Our replace values are 300 for original, 10 is what we've sunk, 7 for our yearly average maintenance costs, and then we replace it in year 6. So if we do a total cost of ownership analysis and we're looking at those highlighted are past, those not highlighted are future, we now get a sum for each of the scenarios. And I only did 3 here, but our cheapest option would be to replace it today at $817,000 versus $917 or $840 to renew or monitor. There's some things to consider here though. Leadership and mission alignment. Sometimes the cheapest option is not always the best option for the organization. This roof might be on a building that we're getting ready to replace very, very soon. So the decision from leadership or to align with the mission might be just to monitor that. There's other leadership and mission alignments. It might be programmatic. There might be other reasons we don't have the funding to replace it this year, so we're having to make hard decisions. But TCO provides a tool to make those decisions. Some other considerations are time and effort versus the value of the number. In this case, we've created estimates of past costs, and that might be okay to use as you're running through these examples. Also, supplemental TCO elements, is it scalable? Can we do it for this one roof? We can certainly do it for all roofs across all campus, or extrapolate this out to all systems within our organization. If you do that, we'll definitely need an information management system. So with that, TCO provides visibility on the best solution, might be the lowest, might not be, for the university. So if we move this to a from a basic to a mid and complex implementation, everything is very similar to what we saw with our new asset. So we won't go through that, but the changes are within the asset performance, you might have a trigger there from the % of maintenance costs to our current replacement costs. And then you're also creating that scenario for each of the decision areas. So some of our TCO strategies to implement today for existing assets: start with what you can, or prioritize your existing assets. You don't have to do everything today. Focus on analysis mindset rather than spend today. So not just, hey, what is this going to cost me today to fix this, to replace it, but let's analyze that, provide solutions based on those numbers. Again, focus variables that are within your control. Use actual costs when available. That's always a plus from getting basic to a mid and complex level. Share information decisions with all the organization. I talked about in the roof example that the organization may make a decision to tear down that building. That would be really critical to the people who are making the decision whether to repair or replace it or just leave it in place. So leadership needs to share that information, but also the people making the decisions to replace that roof also need to share that information with technicians who are out there patching it today. Again, documenting lessons learned, and then enlist in efforts on existing assets that would reduce your total cost of ownership, such as retro-commissioning, energy-saving measures. That gets you from the basic level to our mid and complex. You can add in the costs to do some of those fault detection, retro-commissioning, energy-saving measures, and then figure out how that would impact your reduction in total cost of ownership and if that's worth it to do.
Oops, I got the wrong way.
Yeah.
I did. Sorry. Okay. So bottom line, looking at your, all this information collected, now you're getting a lot smarter about the assets that you have, a lot, and not necessarily making non-sustainable decisions. And that's really what we're looking at, really trying to have something that isn't going to, you make a less expensive decision today that's going to have really negative effect on you longer in the long run. And so we're getting from a really short run, a short-term view of what the, just your first cost, looking at now short and then even really long, 25, even more years that you can plan and look ahead into the organization and how it what the cost, what your decisions today, what the impact your decisions are going to be today, long into the future. And everybody ultimately, like I say, all the reporting needs to match so that one part of the organization isn't looking at one set of reports or set of facts, and you're looking at a different set. In that case, then everybody might be right, but they're all based on different information. So we want to make sure that that's why we have a standard, is so that everybody's coming from the same direction. Anna? Hello?
Oh, I muted myself when I coughed.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
So simple example. Thank you, Deek, for
I was going to jump in.
So a simple example of a long-term plan is a notional 25-year plan. So you would add in your first cost, your major renewal. You'd add in your annual maintenance cost to include that jump up for your periodic renovation costs. That would continue on until you get your annual maintenance costs that increase because of inflation or other factors. And then there are other elements you can add is a risk value. You showed that the system increases in risk as it gets older, and then also your FCI value, how that fluctuates with replacing, renewing, or repairing throughout with that. So it's a simple approach that can be used for a single asset or an entire portfolio.
So what Doug Christensen, I think many of you still remember when he really got a lot of this started, and we owe a lot to him, but he was able to apply all of these concepts at Brigham Young University. So what would happen is every year he tracked how much money he was getting in his budget each year and what he was able to accomplish. But then he also was looking at way out into the future as what he was expecting these costs to be. And so he could give the board that was making those decisions, he could give them the information they needed to be able to understand that, hey, you know, we've got a big spike coming up in a couple of years. What might we want to do a little resource leveling to be able to have a more constant level budget? Because that's certainly what, you know, your budgeting people don't like those significant increases, and there are ways that you can do to, you know, move decisions earlier or maybe delay a few things, and so you don't have the spikes that would necessarily in a normal situation kind of surprise everybody and said, oh my gosh, you know, we're in really bad shape. But you can project out into the future, let people know what's coming, what you're expecting, what the impact of not giving you the full amount of money that you asked for. Why is that going to cost you more down the road? Those kind of things can be predicted, and it really, I've been in a situation where I've seen this really work. Doug had the situation in his environment, and I think most everybody, as they move into TCO, will be able to see the same kind of thing happen for them. So we've looked at now, you know, and how we align those reporting to a TCO mindset, and I think again, you know, if you do look out in the future, and I think that's really one of the big differences that I see with TCO, and that's one of the things that we're pushing is, you know, being able to look at your annual budgets out into the future, not just this huge number that's the life cycle cost, but really try to understand, try to predict, you know, even what kind of additional resources you might need to be able to manage some of these high-tech facilities, you know, that you might be bringing into your portfolio. You know, what additional training are people going to need, so that you're not trying to train them after the building's already been delivered, but you have an idea of what's coming so that you can ramp up to be able to get ready for that. So you have this integrity, and if you have a history and you can base that history and then move forward, then people understand that yes, in fact, these are numbers that are realistic. You're not just asking for the moon or anything like that, but these are, you know, these are the numbers you really need in order to be able to operate this facility. One of the things, Doug, at BYU, they would, if they were bringing a new facility into their portfolio, they may decide that they didn't have the resources to be able to support all the old facilities, so they maybe had to decide which facilities they were going to close down. And you know, you do that over a period of time, and you have good information going into the future. You're tracking your actual costs. And you know, now if you're in that mode, if you're thinking that you're going to be able to use this information again in the future, now you might be able to preserve it and be able to capture it, and use those actual costs. You share across the board. It doesn't mean, you know, again, you still have your same organization, but you just have a way of sharing that information so that everybody's not having to collect their own set of data. And you have a common operating environment, and you showcase what are the things that are successful, and you know, how is this improving? And if it's not improving, then make an adjustment the other way. You know, if it's not showing that you're you know, these decisions you're making have not benefited you, then you know, see what you can do to affect it the other way. So we've got these three areas that we've talked about: new assets or products, the existing assets, as well as the as well as what you gain by being able to do all the other the basics, and being able to have a long-term future vision of where things are.
Let's take a look at our next steps for APPA. We have published phase 1 of our standard that has been released, and it's available for purchase on appa.org, and it highlights our key principles, the 13. Phase 2 implementation, which we've briefed you on today, that's coming in 2020 in the first quarter. APPA is also very much committed to helping its members implement this standard, and so we're going to be developing some educational tools to support that effort in the fall of this year. In addition to that, we're working to align with the FPI reporting and the informatics group. APPA has also published today, it's available on their website, a data dictionary, which is very, very useful. If you haven't had a chance to try that, I would say go ahead and take a look at that. It's very, very useful. And last, we are going to be presenting at the annual conference in Denver this July. And there we will go into more of some case studies from universities and the challenges and lessons learned that they've encountered implementing total cost of ownership. And it's also an opportunity for you to ask questions and or talk with us.
And if any of you have some examples, we're certainly more than happy to just let ourselves know, or Billy, anybody at APPA, and we'll try to capture that information, because I think people learn better from the examples that others have in the APPA organization. So what we've hoped today, that we've been able to identify how you can create the value and benefits in TCO. And as I say, you know, a lot of little things add up to big numbers. We hope that you've understand the principles. If you've gotten part 1 and read through those, we will go into a lot more of what it takes to get those operational, and also the what is the minimum, and then how do you expand on the on TCO overall as you get more complex, and then how do you get started, and how do you and you can start with just taking a look at the next purchase you have for a roof or a chiller or something like that, and then ultimately you can expand that to cover new facilities, and you can add in all your existing facilities and be able to have a big picture. So hopefully we've given you information to get started thinking about that, and if we haven't, please let us know also, because we want to continue improving our presentations.
While our great presenters take a sip of water and just breathe for a moment, wanted to let everybody know about our upcoming webinar page, and it's on our new website, and you go there. We have webinars that are scheduled, as I mentioned previously, scheduled out through December. So please check this out and register as soon as you can. The registrations that aren't open, they will be open before too long, so keep checking the webpage. And if the presenters are ready, we're going to get ready to start asking some questions. Our first question is, as an entity looks to update their CMMS, how will the criteria and features of the CMMS be defined to support data collection for TCO?
I can start with that. UT is in the process of getting a new CMMS and what we're calling an IWMS system, and I think some of the things that we are looking to implement as we do that, and that is in the standard for total cost of ownership implementation, is ensuring that the assets are set up initially. For us, that is going to be key, because today, even though we have a CMMS system, it's sort of parsed out in the different organizations. We're so big that different parts of the organization are using different assets to tie back to. So just for example, our maintenance and operations have created their own list of assets within the CMMS system. Project management, a different organization, uses different assets to tie back to when we're replacing that asset. And our CPC, all these acronyms, that level of the organization is also using different assets to tie back to. So for someone in the organization to implement TCO, it's very difficult to tie back to bring all of that information together because the assets are so different in the way that they're housed. So as we look to implement our CMMS, what we're calling IWMS system in the future, we first, for us, that's a key element. Point back to that one asset, have all the other data point back to that. Also sharing information, the integrity piece, that's a big piece for us as well. We're big organizations, and it's difficult for us to share across the way that it's set up today. But in the future, we're hoping we set this up with these total cost of ownership principles such that we're able to share the information across a lot more easier to then make those decisions.
And also, we looked at those other standards earlier. They're all looking at interoperability of being able to, as I say, collect data one time and be able to share it. So the tools that are being built and the software tools that are out there, whether they be CMS or IWIMS products, or whether they're BIM or any COBE, things like that, they're all oriented towards being able to share information. So it's the tools are probably there. Sometimes it's just the organizational mindset and strategies to be able to take advantage of those. And this is these issues that we're talking about are worldwide issues, and people are working on solving those issues. So there are a lot of things out there that are just emerging today. So as you move into this, it'll only get easier, and things will be easier to go as you progress. But COBE talks to a lot of the CMS or the IWIMS products, and as does BIM. So.
Thank you. Our next question is, does the standard include greater definitions of data elements such as current replacement value, which can be defined differently by institutions?
It does. We do provide definitions specifically for current replacement value. We also have formulas for each of the areas, so the standard will have all of that. It's under review right now, or we'd be happy to share all of that with you.
And the APPA Data Dictionary also is providing support for that. I mean, we've gone back to that and tied that into it. So we haven't necessarily repeated everything that's in there. So these different products are building on each other inside of APPA also.
Yeah, that's a great point.
Okay. Does this approach work with TMA?
I am assuming TMA is a IWMS system, if I'm remembering correctly.
Right.
And yes, I think
I believe it.
TCO can be implemented with any application. A mindset of TCO can be applied to any of those IWMS or CMMS systems. You can implement it with an Excel spreadsheet at its basic level. The more complex you get, you can go all the way up to BIM, tying into GIS, that then ties in with COBE and then other applications. But it depends on the level of TCO implementation that you want. But yes, if I'm thinking you're referring to the TMA, and Deke, I don't know if you have a different perspective.
You're right on, and I think that also like I say, all these things are tying together, and the other thing I was going to mention was the product libraries that are now coming online also, where just like when we started CAD, manufacturers provided CAD details. Now they're providing object models of what the information that comes along with the object. So some of that information is this information that we're talking about that you need for TCO, and we're working with some of those organizations and identifying what additional data elements might be required to be able to do a TCO study. So even in BIM through the Building Smart International, they've identified 50 different use cases for BIM. One of those use cases, one of them is quantity takeoff, another is cost analysis, and then a third is actually TCO. So all this is growing at the same time, and the standard is coming out at the right time. And so I think now's a good time to make the decision to start adopting a TCO strategy.
Okay, we have a lot of very specific questions regarding systems, and we'll have Anna and Deke answer those in a private email to you. Do we have any other questions regarding the standard for Deke or Anna? Well, it looks like we don't have any further questions. So I want to thank our presenters, Anna and Deke. We will follow up with an email where if you want to reach out to them, where you can reach either Deke or Anna. And if you have any questions, feel free to send them to me. I want to thank everyone for taking time out of their busy schedule to visit our webinar. Anna, Deke, as always, thank you so much for your knowledge on all of this. Have a great afternoon, and we'll all meet again next month.
Thanks, Billy.